everyone. I hope that you're having fun. I know that I am because... What about microphone?
Bozhidar,
oh, microphone. Yeah. No, I see it. Sorry about this. I speak so loudly and I hate mics like this. But I know that it has to be recorded, so... I learned a bit of Ukrainian before I came, so... Вітаю. И доброго ранку. Yeah, fuck my Ukrainian, it sucks, but I'm just a dumb Bulgarian. I come from the greatest city in the world, Sofia, Bulgaria, and we respect only Bulgarian. But I know that not everyone respects Bulgarian as much as I do, so I do know a bit of English, although I have, wow. So, let's get back on track. I'm a bit angry and annoyed right now, but I guess this will pass. The things that you need to know about me, first of all, I obviously love Ruby, otherwise I wouldn't be here, despite the topic of my presentation. Something very important you need to know about me, I'm an Emacs zealot. I'm really into Emacs, I'm a member of the core team. I do believe that Emacs is the one true editor that will bring balance to the source. So you'd better use it if you want to be on my good side. I happen to serve as the Vice President of Engineering of TopTal, an amazing Ruby shop that builds a ton of super exciting applications in Ruby. And for me, it is an extra special occasion to be here because TopTal is a distributed company. We have engineers all over the world. Some of them are here in this audience, and this is the very first time I have met them, although we have worked in TopTal for quite a while. So this is pretty cool. But probably, yeah. Probably this is the most important thing about me, and this is the reason why I got invited here, that I do quite a bit of open source work according to some questionable metric. Could somebody come here and uninstall this piece of shit from my computer? Okay. It will come up again. Yeah, sorry.
I turn off Wi-Fi.
Okay, sorry about this. No video screen capturing software for me going down the road.
Sorry, this is for you. Relax.
Yeah. I'm a very angry person, and I get annoyed really, really fast, as you've probably noticed. So, I do a lot of open source work, mostly Ruby, Clojure, and Emacs related, and we'll touch upon this going deeper in my presentation. Not everyone appreciates this as much as you do, I guess. This is something that is sticked on my bedroom door from my girlfriend, you know. There have to be some limits. You can read a bit about my technical musings on my blog, or you can read a bit about my Emacs musings on my other blog. If you're feeling especially charitable, you can follow me on Twitter because I'm such a great, charming individual. So nice. And to come a bit, I'm adding an image of a bear. Yeah, I love bears. All sorts of bears. Big bears, small bears, brown bears, polar bears, teddy bears. They make me feel well. And in case of emergencies like the ones we experienced just now, they really help me relax. I'm also a huge fan of the arrow, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm so brave. I love castles. Here's me with a castle. Here's me with another castle and my friends, who I also love. And I even brought them to be supportive for me during this presentation in case I get a mental breakdown or something like this. And this is enough bullshit because we have really quite a lot of ground to cover, so let's cut the chase and get down to business. So, why am I here? I'm here because I'm a mythbuster. Yeah, exactly like those guys, although when I'm busting myths, I usually look like this. So, the myth that I'm going to bust today is that Ruby is perfect. You know, we Ruby folk are an interesting bunch. We constantly pat ourselves on the shoulder and say, yeah, we're the greatest community in the world, we have the best language, everything is so great. But I hate to break it to you, but this is not the truth. Ruby is definitely not a perfect language. And as a matter of fact, no programming language is perfect, not even Clojure. Although it is pretty close to perfection, at least in my book. On the other hand, at least Ruby doesn't suck as much as some other languages, right? So, what are the problems with Ruby, according to me? First of all, Ruby is object-oriented. Wow, this definitely sucks. Ruby is dynamically typed. Whoa. Ruby doesn't have immutable data structures. Whoa, this language seems lamer and lamer by the minute. Ruby doesn't have strong concurrency primitives. Ruby doesn't have enough parentheses. Ruby is not Clojure. I know what you're thinking right about now. He must be messing with us, and he is. So let's get to the real problems. I think that we can group the problems with Ruby in some categories. The first of them would be problems with the runtime, because I think there is quite a confusion between problems with the language itself and problems with its execution environment. For instance, people often say that Ruby is slow. But you know, speed is not an attribute of a programming language. This is an attribute of its runtime environment, which might be an interpreter, a virtual machine, or whatever. So, when people say that Ruby is slow, they usually mean that MRI is slow, because, let's face it, pretty much all the Ruby developers are using MRI. And yeah, MRI is slow. When people say that Ruby threads suck, they are not correct, obviously. What they mean is that MRI threads suck, and MRI threads suck indeed. You know, we have the global interpreter lock. We cannot actually run two threads in parallel. There are some uses of multi-threaded applications even in the current form of the threads in MRI, but definitely we can do better, and we know this is not very hard to achieve, because the guys from JRuby achieved it, the guys from Rubinius achieved it, and clearly the team behind MRI has some improvements to do in this department. When people say that running Ruby on Windows is a pain in the ass, you know, running MRI on Windows is a pain in the ass. But I have been running JRuby on Windows with great success for quite a while. I have no idea how Rubinius is handling Windows, but I do know we can do better. And, you know, this is not a problem of the language, this is a problem of the runtime. Another common complaint is that Ruby doesn't do JIT compilation. And again, you know, the language doesn't do any compilation. This is something that is an attribute of the runtime, and yeah, MRI doesn't do JIT compilation, and yeah, this inhibits the potential for optimizations, for boosting the performance. But I also know that this is something that we can solve down the road. Another common issue that is that is pretty popular amongst Rubyists is that the core library is not very approachable for Rubyists. And what do I mean by this? Consider the source code for a simple method like array_compact. If I wanted to check it out, what do I see? This is a ton of fugly C code. And I'm a Ruby engineer. I'm supposed to know Ruby. I'm not supposed to know C, right? So how can I make heads or tails of this shit? It's kind of hard. But it's not a problem of the language, although it is a bit lame. It's a problem of the implementation. MRI cannot optimize effectively a lot of Ruby code, so we have to get down to Ruby to pump the performance. But if we go to Rubinius' source code, we see that the implementation of this very same method is written in pretty straightforward Ruby code, which is approachable to all Rubyists because, as I said, we know Ruby. So I'd really love to see something done in this department. And Rubyists really love to make fun of Java, but if you check the Java standard library for the standard VM, the hotspot VM, there are a ton of classes implemented in Java and pretty little C and assembler code lying around. So it seems to me Java got something right, which we have yet to improve. So before we wrap this section, keep in mind that the language is not its runtime, and we definitely need a better standard runtime. There have been some efforts to improve it in recent Ruby versions. Pretty much everything since Ruby 1.9 has been efforts to improve the garbage collection performance, the execution performance, but we are very, very far away from where we should be. And I guess the problem here is that there isn't enough collaboration between the people implementing Ruby execution environments. I really feel that there should have been some cross-pollination between MRI, Rubinius for the greater good of the community, but this is yet to happen. Let's move forward with another pain point for the community, RubyGems and bundler. Tell me, how many of you like to type bundle exec before every command they have to run? Whoa. I see we have some masochists around us. This is a bit disturbing. I really believe that we took the wrong approach from day one. And I really believe that we're on the right track to alleviate this. Very few people know that RubyGems 2.2 introduced basic support for Gemfiles a while back. This means that that RubyGems basically will understand your Gemfile walk. It will prepare the correct set of dependencies for the execution, and everything will be lean and mean, and you won't have to run bundle exec before every command. This doesn't work by default. It has to be enabled to work, but it is a step in the right direction. And I think the end game we should be aiming for is to have bundle as a subcommand of RubyGems, of the gem command. This is a wrapper known as the dream, and because this is my dream, this is the picture. But this should be a concern of just a single tool. And I know that there are some ongoing efforts to merge the bundler features into RubyGems. This is going to take at least 2 or 3 years, but it has to be done because having two tools that do mostly the same stuff, you know, they install gems, they resolve dependencies, stuff like this is pretty bad. Duplication always sucks. There can be only one tool, and we have to strive for this. There wasn't much progress in this regard since the initiative to merge RubyGems and bundler was announced a year ago, but I do hope that something like this is bound to happen in the near future, and by near future, 2-3 years at least. So, going forward, the Rails effect. You know, I guess most of you here are Rails developers. I used to be a Rails developer as well. So this is pretty natural in the Ruby community. If we rewind the clock a bit to 2005, exactly 10 years ago, when you ask somebody about Ruby, all you'd get, yeah, facial expressions just like this. Nobody knew what Ruby was. In 2006, Rails was a couple of months old, and this was the beginning of a revolution. Everybody was like, oh my God, Rails is amazing. 2 years ago, 2 years afterwards, people were telling things like, oh my God, Rails is amazing and useful, because let's face it, Rails 1 really sucked. And Ruby today is something that is totally, the Ruby community today is totally dominated by web development. A recent survey shows that 96% of all Ruby developers are web developers, and 90% of them are doing Rails development. I don't know whether this is bothering you or not, but it is definitely bothering me, because it seems that our community has a buzz factor of 1. If some other community comes up with something significantly better than Rails, we're fucked. And what is even more disturbing is that Rails is dominating the community so completely that is actually chartering the course for the future development of the language itself. This is the changelog for Ruby 2.2. Let's see how many times the word Rails appears in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what do you think, but my friend here thinks that this is fucked up. One web framework, no matter how popular, no matter how great, cannot be directing the development of a programming language. This is insane. We need to grow out of Rails' shadow. We really need some alternatives to Rails if we want to keep our community viable going forward. For instance, when we compare Ruby with Python, Python is used a lot for system administration, for statistical analysis, for big data processing, for GUI applications, and Ruby is used for Rails. This is really sad, and I really hope that some alternatives will appear. Lately there has been interesting developments in this area. RubyMotion allows you to write applications for iOS and Android. We have the Vote framework, which allows you to write rich client-side applications in a radically different way from what the Rails ways is. The OpenRB project allows you to swap JavaScript for Ruby, and this is pretty cool. And we should be exploring other avenues, other exciting vectors to preserve our community viable and vibrant. Otherwise, we're really heading down the route of the dinosaurs, and you know, they have been extinct for quite a while. And there are some general problems with our community. First of all, we are the community with the most fanboys in existence. We have so many people that are blindly following the leaders like Mats, like DHH, without questioning any of their decisions. And you know, if everyone is thinking alike, then somebody definitely isn't thinking. Nobody is perfect. Nobody makes the right calls all the time. We have to question everything. We have to take every decision with a certain grain of salt. Otherwise, bad things are bound to happen. And I do think that we have a general issue with Ruby stewardship. First of all, even the benevolent dictators are still dictators. And I really don't want to be a part of a community where my voice wouldn't be heard. I have seen Mats take some pretty strange decisions over the years. He accepted features that were widely criticized by the bulk of the community. He refused to cooperate with the guys from Rubinians pretty publicly. And I really prefer shared responsibility, shared decision taking. You don't need an enterprise committee like Java, but having a few people instead of one person stewarding the community is generally a better idea. There's also no clear vision. Pretty much nobody right now except Mats has any idea what is the future of Ruby 1 year down the road, or 2 years, or 3 years. And if you go to Java's website, there is a pretty extensive roadmap for the next 5 years. But right now, I really have to venture a guess what is coming next. Mats has this habit of doing keynotes on popular conferences. He explores some radical ideas, and pretty much nothing like them ever happens. So this is messed up. We also don't have standard. MRI is the standard, and language implementers that are doing in alternative implementations are never certain if something in MRI is a feature or a bug. They just know that they have to copy even the bugs because there is no proper standard, and Mats has actively been refusing to get involved in standardizing the language, which is really strange to me. He also has this pretty crazy informal deprecation policy. He'd comment on an issue or send an email that something is deprecated, and this is it. No deprecation messages are actually added in the language. People aren't notified about this. He just decides that something is deprecated, which is not the normal way to do things. Trust me about this. I already touched upon the limited collaboration with alternative implementations. I can give you a concrete example. When refinements were being considered for inclusion, the JRuby team was 100% against their inclusion. JRuby is pretty popular, but Matt said, fuck you, and included them anyways. A nice guy, huh? And we also have a problem with the innovation. This is the list of notable changes in Ruby 2.2. And to be honest, I don't see absolutely anything notable here. And yeah, and no, there is nothing notable. Nothing notable has been changing, has been happening ever since Ruby 1.9. We might deny this or come to grips with reality, but all the additions to the language recently have been fairly small. The bulk of the efforts have been concentrated on improving MRI itself because it has a ton of shortcomings, and this is very unfortunate because I do believe that the language itself could use an improvement or two, and I'll talk a bit about them in a minute. And before I wrap the issues with the communities, just 2 URLs. Clearly, there are some people with issues in the community which like to vent them out in conventional and unconventional ways. The community thrives on drama instead of constructive dialogues, and this is something that really saddens me because I don't like to be surrounded by drama queens. I prefer to work with reasonable, smart people and to have constructive discussions with them. And this is my favorite part. This is probably the things that you actually came to see, the problems with the language. Yeah, sounds ominous. First of all, there is a ton of useless stuff, in my opinion. And what is my definition of useless stuff? I started programming in Ruby in 2007. I remember this very well because the song Ruby by the Kaiser Chiefs was playing on the radio, and I was in the mood to learn a new programming language. I knew that there was something called Ruby, so I went with it. First of all, for loops. Never use them. Don't really need them. There is a subtle difference between the scoping of variables in force and in each blocks, for instance, but you really don't need to think about this. Forget about for loops. I think that including them in the language was a mistake. Begin and end blocks. Most of you probably don't even know that they exist. They basically allow you to alter the flow of control of an application. You can have many begin blocks and they will be executed before the application starts its normal execution, and you can have many end blocks. Begin blocks are something really strange to me. I definitely don't think that it is a good idea to inject code from various places at the beginning of your application. Some people would disagree, but I would definitely write this code like this. And I believe that even for more complex situations, we can totally avoid such strange flow of control tricks. And as far as end is concerned, we do have kernel at exit, so why would anyone be using end blocks? I hope that this will be removed soon, maybe in Ruby 3.0, but we have to see this. Flip-flops. You know, this is the most useless feature in a language I have ever seen. All the people who are in defense of this feature cannot think of another useful usage for it other than to filter the text between some boundaries. And you know, we can abstract this away in a class or a module or whatever and be done with it. We don't need special syntax. We don't have to burden people like me who are writing parsers and linters to process nodes like the flip-flops. This really sucks. And I know that there is a strong potential for it to be removed in Ruby 3.0. Sorry about this. Nula is 0 in Bulgarian. So you can drop by this issue and support the removal of flip-flops. Block comments. Most Rubists don't know about them as well. Usually block comments are a pretty good idea, but in Ruby there is some fatal flaw in their implementation. They have to be placed at the very beginning of a line, otherwise they won't work. So you can't write this. This will be a syntax error. You have to write it like this. And you know, I'm pretty sure that nobody wants to write comments like this. They are somewhat useful for top-level class and module comments, but I think we can safely remove them from the language. Character literals. They used to be fucked up before Ruby 1.9. Now they're just the same as single character strings, so we can safely remove them. There are some corner cases there as well, but I do believe that this is a useful feature of the language that just burdens poor parser writers. And this is the totally useless stuff. Now we're moving forward with the more controversial, redundant stuff. All of you probably know that there is more than one way to do things in Ruby, and some people consider this a good thing. I personally consider it a mixed blessing, because when you have alternatives, you have to make choices, and choices are pretty hard. And let me show you what I'm speaking about. For instance, in the core library, there are a ton of method aliases. You probably have seen some of them. In my experience so far, the only usefulness for those aliases is that people have more material to do bike shading on whether it is better to use collect or map, inject or reduce, which are totally pointless discussions. And I was really confused that somebody decided it is a good idea to add map and reduce, but not filter. Have you seen another language with a find all method except Ruby? This is not a very common method name for this operation. Another thing that I profoundly dislike are the proc objects. And by this I mean proc objects created explicitly using proc.new or kernel proc. And why do I dislike them profoundly? They have no arity checks, meaning you can pass whatever number of parameters you want, which is pretty strange, right? They have non-local returns. If you return from a proc object, this will return from the enclosing scope, which is not what I would expect. This makes sense for the blocks that are appearing literally in the code, and this is the reason why this was duplicated in the proc objects themselves, but you really shouldn't be creating those explicitly, because this behavior is very counterintuitive. in, say, a map or a reduce or whatever. And pretty much every language in existence that has lambdas has only lambdas because, you know, they enforce their parameters, they have sane return semantics, and this is enough. So please do not use proc new, do not use proc, they suck. Single quoted string literals. Every time somebody wants to talk with me about Ruby style, they ask me, should I be using single quoted literals or double quoted literals? And I'm like, yeah, this is the deepest and most profound thing that we can be discussing about style. I have my preferences. I don't think that single quoted string literals are totally useless, but I won't go into details about this. But I really wish that they didn't exist just so I wouldn't have all those meaningless discussions, because bike shading is just bike shading. It is not constructive, it is not productive. And we have so much more fuel for bike shading. We have a ton of obscure %something literals. Have you used ever %s or %x? Pretty few people have used them. Very few people have used %q or %q uppercase or %, and I'm sure that at least half of you don't know that that the uppercase q and the % are the same thing. Why the fuck do we need two of them? So much confusion. Do we really need a literal syntax for an array of symbols? I think that instead of focusing on real issues, we're solving such trivial problems. I really wish that none of this existed in the language. I also wish that we didn't have two types of block syntaxes. We have this and this. They have different precedence. You know, the braces bind stronger than do end. But I really believe that we would have been fine without this. This was done just to allow us to write less parentheses in the language, which in my mind is a pretty misguided idea to begin with. Pretty much all the languages have a single syntax for this, and we would have been so much better off with just one ourselves, because right now we have to think of stupid rules like we are going to use one syntax for single line blocks, the other for multi-line blocks, or we will be thinking of some semantic rules just to justify a feature that shouldn't have been devised to begin with. And let me show you some more concrete example of why this is a bad idea. So, as I said, I'm super excited to be here because this is my very first time in the Ukraine, my very first time in Kiev, and I really love to travel, explore new cultures, meet with new people. So, this is me right now, although it doesn't show. So, if I want to shout out "Hello Kiev" 3 times, in a row, I can do it like this, or 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 like this. Fuck this shit. Another example. If I want to upcase an array of strings, I can do it like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. Clearly, decision making is a pretty complex process. I really don't want to be thinking about all this shit. This is part of the reason why I started the Ruby style guide a while back, because we have to be focused on the actual problems at hand and not be discussing quotes, braces placement, delimiter types, and trivial stuff like this, because programming is about solving actual problems. And I do believe that many people constantly forget about this. So are all those options worth our while? Hell no. Stop the bike shading and focus on what matters. This is This is what I really want to tell you. And let's go to the really bad stuff in the language. Nobody in the world can convince me that what follows is a good idea. First of all, we have a ton of APIs that are pretty new happy, meaning that they return news when they can be returning something else. For instance, does this sound reasonable to you? Doesn't sound reasonable to me. Autoload. This always sucked. People always knew it. Finally, Mats realized it, and this is going to be removed in Ruby 3.0, so I won't go into many details. If you're using it in your code, please stop. And not. Despite what many people are trying to convince you with blogs, screencasts, and whatever, those are not flow of control operators. Those are just plain old logical operators that have lower precedence than the regular ones. They were created with just one goal in mind, and this was to promote the less parenthesis style of programming, which I already mentioned. And I really don't believe that you should be thinking of ways to justify them, to make them fit your workflow, because this really isn't worth it. And to make it even more clear, in any language, and or usually have different precedences, and has higher precedence than or. And this is the case for ampersand, ampersand, and bar, bar. Ampersand, ampersand has higher precedence, but and or have the same precedence. Why the fuck? We have mutable strings, when pretty much no language, not even the dreaded JavaScript does this. How misguided is this? We have reassignable constants. Constants that are reassignable. Whoa. I have absolutely no idea why somebody thought this is a good idea. It's not. Class variables. The strangest possible behavior in inheritance. Just forget about them and use class instance variables instead, because this is the only sane way to handle the problem that you are probably trying to handle. Sets are not first-class citizens. This is super disappointing for me, and I know that most of you aren't even using sets. Why not? Sets are not part of the core library, and people generally prefer to use only stuff in the core library. They rarely include stuff from the standard library if this is totally not necessary, and sets are so useful. It's not a good idea to be subtracting one array from another. You really want to be doing a set operation here, but set usage is not really promoted in Ruby. If it were up to me, I would have even literal set syntax, as many languages are actually having. And so many poor naming choices. We have a method named kernel puts, and I know that everyone here is familiar with it, but why isn't this named print line? Because we do have a method named print, which does what puts does without a new line. What's the rationale here? We have a method named defined, which looks like a predicate method. We play with it a bit. We see that it returns a string, a new, a string. Do you see a Boolean returned by defined? Is this the right behavior for a predicate method? I don't think so. And, you know, how many languages would name a method include and not includes? Mats can try to justify this as much as he wants, but this would have been the only reasonable use for aliases, an elegant way to deprecate the poor use of English in the core library, in the standard library, and solve this once and for all. Active support is actually patching all of those methods, and I think that this is the only nice extension from active support. I really hope that this will be fixed one day in the language, because I program in many languages, not only in Ruby, and I never can force myself to write something that is not grammatically correct. And yeah, we have methods with names like kernel %. You know, this is a way to do string formatting. You can do this, but it is not exactly the descriptive, intention revealing, or something like this, right? On the other hand, this is a bit better. This is even better, and this is perfectly clear. So tell me, in what universe would you prefer kernel % over kernel format? Doesn't really make sense. The Perl-style global variables. Seriously? This is way better. Who knows what this means? I do, now. And what about this? Even the extended name isn't much better, but still it is better. JRuby have made a giant leap forward. They just defined the longer, more readable names by default in their core library. I hope that MRI will do this soon, but until then, everyone should start their programs by requiring English and forgetting about the short Perl variable names. And there is something else. Global variables? What the fuck? Even Java doesn't have those. Global variables are so bad, everybody knows it, but you know, we use them all the time because this is Ruby, we have them, and we have to deal with them. Another frustration of me, we had this pretty great hash literal syntax, which was universal and allowed us to present all sorts of hashes. And we got this improved syntax, which works for just symbols as keys. And now I have to write programs that are using partly one syntax, partly the other, because somebody decided it's a better idea, that it is more idiomatic to use the newer syntax. And yeah, we get some nice situations like this. I remember that originally I couldn't look at code like this. 5 years later, it kind of looks reasonable. I can tolerate it, but I will never like it. And what about Perl-style regex interactions? Do you really believe that this is the right way to do something in an object-oriented language? You get a match position as an integer, some special variables with obscure names get set. There is a bit of a workaround you can do. You can use regex last match, so you wouldn't have to use $$ tilde or $1 or $2, but this is not the proper way to do it, in my opinion, because we have object-oriented methods that are behaving way nicer. You get a match object, you can even yield this match object to a block if there is a match. You don't have to write conditional logic, and this is great. So consider the usage of match. I know that very few people are doing it, and I have absolutely no idea why so. It is so much more clear. And let's not even talk about the documentation. There is a method in string and regexp classes which does negative matching for regular expressions. But try finding this on rubydoc.org. It doesn't exist anywhere. And this is public API. And I am going to quickly conclude with a rundown of our beloved standard library, beloved in parentheses, in quotes. So there was a very popular article 5 years ago by Mike Perham of Sidekick fame. He called the Ruby standard library a ghetto. He had a lot of strong opinions about it. You know, he doesn't like that many of the libraries were included around 2000, 2003, and were never actually updated afterwards. There are some really horrible APIs there, like net HTTP. Does anyone love this? I doubt so. He proposed us kill all of the infrequently used libraries in the standard library and just extract them as gems. which is a pretty reasonable suggestion, I think. And I was wondering, is he the only person frustrated with the standard library, especially now 5 years later? So I asked around on Twitter and got the following responses from some pretty well-respected members of the community. So you can see Xavier Noria of the Rails core team definitely doesn't like NetHTTP. Aaron Cruz as well. Our Ben thinks that timeout RB is a pile of shit. Although he said it more politely. Our Eric, who is sitting over there, also has some things to say about the standard library. It's not updated pretty often. It doesn't really track the latest development in the language itself, which is really strange for something bundled with the language, because this gives you the opportunity to upgrade the libraries every time when a new feature is introduced in the language, because the library gets shipped with the standard runtime and the core library. So pretty strange, you know. He has more frustrations. And more frustrations. And more frustrations. And I know that I'm running out of time, so I really won't go into many details, but clearly something isn't quite right with the standard library. We definitely can do better. And this is the time and place where we discuss what we can do better. So fucking what? You are a very angry man. This is what you can think about me. You delivered a brilliant rant here, and nothing is going to change. Maybe. I'm very well aware how hard it is to steward a successful project. There is a fantastic talk by Brian Getz, the chief architect of Java. Stewardship, the sobering parts, absolutely everyone who is ever complaining about a language or a library they are using should watch this first to see the problem from the perspective of the maintainers. But we can either admit that we have problems or just stuff them under the rug and pretend that they don't exist, and this really isn't helping out. I do this talk not to vent my frustration, I do it to prompt you to action. File tickets, because the more tickets that are filed, the better the chances that some of them will be taken into account and action will be taken to resolve the problem. Send patches, because tickets with patches are usually way more likely to be approved, to be merged, and this is important. Block about the issues, raise the awareness. The bigger the awareness is, the better the chances that something will be improved. And do like me, speak about the issues at conferences, because some people are really not aware that some issues exist because they don't know better. This is the value of us getting together, after all, to exchange ideas, to exchange perspective, viewpoints. The only way we can truly make Ruby better is together. And if we do not constantly try to improve our language, our community, our runtimes, 5 years from now, this will be the state of things. Thanks for having me here. It was an honor.
Okay, if anyone have questions, do very quickly, okay?
Hello. At first, sorry for my bad English. I have two small questions. At first, you said that there are no innovations in Ruby releases. What are you expecting in new versions of this? What do you see there?
Well, I see a lot of things, but I'm not Ruby's architect, so my personal preferences have really nothing to do with what is going to happen. I really want to cut out all of the craft. And from the things that Mats has been discussing recently, I'd love to see some optional static typing in the language. I'd love to see some He didn't discuss this, but I'd love to see it, some immutable, persistent data structures, so we can truly practice both functional and object-oriented programming, because right now people say that Ruby is friendly for a functional style of programming, but this is definitely not the case.
Oh, and another one small, it's more for management question. We are not true programmers, we are using IDE, not Emacs, not Vim, and our students in practice come to us and said that their IDE shows that double quoting strings are not preferred when you are using some variables in this. How we must get them understand that it's bad, that we are using our own style guide and we prefer this way. Do you have same problems or some with this?
Well, as you saw, I'm a very nasty person and nobody dares disagree with me. So things happen just the way I want them to happen. I don't have issues like this.
Oh, thanks.
Hi, I agree with your presentation. I got to know that somebody else hates Ruby as me. Okay, but in general, it's not about question. It's not even question. Just point to discuss. What do you think? I think that we have lots of syntax stuff because of Ruby was developed like a DSL language for writing DSLs, and we must live with it or not. What do you think? Or maybe should we change this behavior of language to make it like a Java with only with a single way to do something, or maybe we can live with the idea of Ruby that Ruby is flexible language and there are lots of ways to do something because of its kind of even DSL, not language.
Well, I do believe that the actual reason for the current state of things has nothing to do with flexibility. I just believe that while the language was not very popular, Mats was inclined to add whatever would convince somebody to use his language. Because this is how language development happens. The early users have a strong influence on the language design or on the libraries, because they are the people using your stuff and you want to have users. And when something becomes pretty popular, it's hard to undo some of the bad choices, because somebody is always liking something, no matter how bad it is. Some people have very strong, very vocal opinions, and somebody is bound to be unhappy. Whether Ruby is really good for DSLs or not is debatable. It is really one of the languages that fit well internal DSLs, but I have seen some that do it way better, pretty much every Lisp dialect. Scala also is a good language to be writing internal DSL, and it has made less compromises than Ruby, so there is definitely an alternative way.
Thank you.
Hello.
Awesome t-shirt.
Hello, Bozhidar.
Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, my name is Sergey Kutsko. I'm owner of KS Lab Solutions, and first of all, I want to say thank you for Svitla Ruby conference. And this was first company that employed me. So I want to say TopTal that inspired people like you. And my question is, when Ruby will look like you?
When I write another language myself and name it Better Ruby or the Perfect Ruby, which is not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay, thank you.
So hi, I'm totally new to Ruby, so I've never write Ruby. I don't know it, I can read it, but not write. So the question is, most of your examples are pretty simple, like don't use this method because there is an alternative. And I think that one can write a simple IST transformation to transform the text from old style to new style to better style. So, and the next step would be like having an automatic tool that would do such transformations and send pull requests automatically. Why don't we do that? We have only like 100,000 RubyGems, so it's doable.
This tool already exists. It is called RuboCop.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Robocop should send a pull request to every RubyGem. Sir. Oh, that's not funny.
Okay, guys, that's all. Thank you, Bozhidar. Great speech. И всех приглашаю на перерыв. В 10 минут можете выпить кофе, пообщаться, перекурить. Вот. Увидимся через 10 минут.